Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again for another Son of Chelsea podcast. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Tuesday. It's Let's Talk Chelsea. We're going to be breaking down the latest news surrounding the club, a bit about Jude Bellingham. Matt Law has given some interesting quotes around him and Chelsea's potential interest. Christopher Nkunku, I'll be showing a clip from my discussion with Adam Newson. Really good information about him and that deal getting closer and closer. Looks like it's going to go through now. The right back situation, some targets coming up for January. We've also got stuff on Hakim Ziyech and how Chelsea almost signed Pedri back in 2019. Before we get into any of that good stuff, I want to ask you guys, if you are watching on my YouTube channel, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Really helps out. Also helps out if you are enjoying the content, hit that like button too. And if you're listening on the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. Son of Chelsea is a part of the 90 Min podcast network. The World Cup, it's been really enjoyable. It's still bizarre to me because actually today Chelsea's pre-season begins with Graham Potter at Cobham, and then they're going to go to Abu Dhabi apparently for some warm weather training. They're going to play Aston Villa, I think, on the 11th or 12th of December as kind of one of those warm-up games. We knew all this was coming, but it's just so bizarre, like how cold it is outside in London currently, and kind of your brain is so used to a certain type of calendar around football. At this time of the year, we're ramping up to the festive period. We have loads of games in the Premier League, but that obviously isn't the case, and we've got a World Cup going on, and Chelsea's pre-season is beginning in basically December. It's so bizarre this year, but we'll see. Hopefully we'll see some picks. Hopefully some of those players who have been injured will be back in training. Wesley Fofana, we have seen I think training or getting ready. Ben Chilwell on a treadmill was a good sort of video to see last week. Maybe his recovery is faster than we expect on his hamstring injury. And mainly Reece James being back, hopefully by the time that Bournemouth game comes around after Christmas. But let's get into it. The FA Cup, of course, it had to be Man City. I actually joked with someone that it was going to be Man City away. And typically, of course, it's Man City away. Listen, you can't lose the FA Cup final if you get knocked out in the third round. That's my one positive of the day. But apart from gallows humour, we don't know what the situation is going to be by the time we actually reach that game. I know a lot of people right now are writing Chelsea off. I can understand why, given the mood and form of recent times. But I suspect it's going to be changed teams. And also, Chelsea face Man City at Stamford Bridge in the Premier League, I think 2 or 3 days before that game takes place, or at least a weekend when it takes place. So fingers crossed, that could be a really good few days for Graham Potter at Chelsea and really change the mood. But you never know. If you want to be more sort of, as I say, gallows humour about it, it may help us having less games in the second half of the season. But let's get into more of the big news. Jude Bellingham. Matt Law was on the London is Blue podcast. I definitely suggest, if you don't listen to London is Blue podcast, please go and do it. They get some great guests on. They've got sort of spin-off shows, the Tinkermen podcast with Joe Tweeds. Some really good tactical breakdown on there, and they of course have some history podcasts with Rick Glanville, club historian, lots of good stuff, and they get Matt Law on a consistent basis. And I always suggest, please go in the link in the description box below on my YouTube video and just search them London is Blue pod to listen to the full podcast, because Matt Law gives a lot of insight on a lot of different issues. But this one here, as they tweeted out one of his quotes, and as he explained on the podcast when asked about this, Chelsea will bid big for Jude Bellingham, but they are not favourites to sign him. They will match any bid that is made for Bellingham, but the move won't just come down to money. It very much feels like Bellingham for Borussia Dortmund is going to be 2023's Erling Haaland situation. A little bit different because, of course, no release clause, so someone jumping in and getting a really good deal for what is a gem, not going to be the case. And it looks like for Bellingham, it's going to be a massive deal. But, you know, Bellingham, like Haaland, like a lot of these big players, are going to have kind of a full like buffet of the best European clubs. And we don't know where Chelsea are going to be by the time the summer rolls around. You know, Chelsea is still going to have Champions League football, which, of course, is a big commodity. It doesn't mean that we can't sign big players. You know, you still see situations where that can still happen. I mean, we signed N'Golo Kante in the year where we did not have Champions League football. Nkunku, as we'll get to very soon about him as well, looks like it's going to be wrapped up. So it's not the end of the world, but, you know, players like Bellingham, with the potential they have, with the stage they want to be playing in, you know, they're impressing at the World Cup currently. They want to be jumping up to Champions League football instantly. And you know, that's currently what he's got at Borussia Dortmund. But obviously, if he moves to a Man City, Liverpool have been linked. I'm sure Real Madrid will be linked, with all the great midfielders there picking up at the moment after Aurelien Tchouameni and Camavinga. it's going to be a big summer. But it shows that Chelsea's new owners want to be going out there for the biggest names. They want to be competing for those star names if they can. Of course, I think a lot of it comes down to player preference, what the plan is for that player, and of course, I think where Chelsea will be in the summer. But, I think this is very exciting because Jude Bellingham, all right, I consistently say this, I think Declan Rice for me is the profile Chelsea need, and I think is, I'm not going to say a safe bet, but touch wood, I think he is a very, very good option for Chelsea. And given some of the rumours around the feed at West Ham could be expecting next summer, Chelsea have to try and go in there and get that deal done because it would be incredible to sign Declan Rice and finally get him back in a Chelsea shirt where, it's kind of that destiny. But for Bellingham as an attacking midfielder, really exciting to see what he could develop into, given what he already is achieving in his career. And, it was a bit of a shame the other day that he was taken off. I didn't think he had an amazing game. Few England players had amazing games against the USA. I was a little bit disappointed to see him taken off, actually, because I think he just offers things in the final third as an attacking midfielder that I think few players actually possess in the modern game. And I think those are things that could absolutely be harnessed at Chelsea if we were to get him. But let's talk about one player who looks like will become a Chelsea player, and that is Christopher Nkunku. Fabrizio Romano tweeting here that Chelsea are closing in on the Nkunku deal. Medical already done as reported in September. Agreement is in place with Leipzig for more than 60 million euros clause, easier payment terms apparently. Long-term deal agreed starting from June 23. Time to sign contracts, and here we go. I'm going to play a clip from my discussion with Adam Newson, Chelsea's chief football London writer, just about Nkunku when I asked him, and this is the latest on that situation.
Yeah, well, it seems the outline of a deal is very much in place now for next summer. There was some talk about maybe trying to bring it forward until January, but I don't think that's going to happen, partly because of his injury, but also because Leipzig are still in the Champions League. I don't have the same. To be honest, I didn't really have any misgivings about Timo Werner until he arrived, and then realised quite soon on this isn't going to work. I think what goes in Christopher Nkunku's favour is that technically he's probably on another level to Timo Werner. He doesn't require 40 yards of space to run into to be really effective. He's excellent in tight spaces with the ball. He's very intelligent with his movement. He is just a very well-rounded footballer, and ultimately it's difficult almost to be excited about an attacking player arriving at Chelsea because we've been burned so many times before. But you'd like to think he has the skill set that is very adaptable to the Premier League. He's a player who could be used in different positions across the front line depending on the sort of game state. And ultimately, he may be a player that can unlock a couple of other players because of his ability. It's a big price tag that's going to be on him. And yes, we do have the consideration it's the Bundesliga, but I think you also have to look at his performances in the Champions League as well. He's had some very big performances in the Champions League against Premier League sides as well. So I'm cautiously optimistic when it comes to Nkunku.
He's got that injury currently. We will see how he recovers from it. If you want to hear sort of my more sort of in-depth opinions around Christopher Nkunku, the podcast is up there. Recent shows I've sort of given my thoughts around him and why I'm mostly positive despite my Timo Werner fears. But let's just hope if it does get signed and agreed, he comes back a really good player from that injury, because obviously that is one concern, that he may return, as a lot of players do, not the same player, not as electric. And also the massive question beyond all of that is how he adapts to life in the Premier League, despite what he's currently doing at Leipzig in the Bundesliga, where he looks an incredible player. Everyone that watches him says he's a gem for Chelsea to sign. He really is. But we know at Chelsea with attackers how great we are at turning him into something very different. So we will see on that one. I do want to briefly touch on Hakim Ziyech, because at the back end of last week, we started getting reports once again that AC Milan were interested in him. This has been a link that I've been speaking about on the channel for years now, pretty much the summer of 2021, I want to say, after we won the Champions League, after his first season at Chelsea. There were so many links around AC Milan, a potential loan, never materialised. And at the time, I think the jury was still out on Ziyech, but we wanted to see sort of a second season. We've seen that second season under Tuchel didn't go as well, despite some high points. And now with Ziyech, I think I was tallying it up for a piece I wrote for Football London, where it's under like 500 competitive minutes for Chelsea so far this season. He hasn't been a regular. It's around 9 appearances. It is woefully short of a player at his age and what he would expect of himself at this point in his career. And it just kind of feels inevitable that at least out of him and Pulisic, because people coupled them together. And I can understand why, two wide players or two players that were signed with a lot of hype at one point looked like they were going to be dominant players in Chelsea starting 11, but haven't been consistent enough, needing sort of a new fresh start for them. And I think that is exactly what Hakim Ziyech needs. It was good to see him perform for his nation, be a big part, get that assist for that 2-0 win against Belgium on Sunday. It's a shame. It's a bit like with Christian Pulisic, but I think with Ziyech, I do think Lampard leaving was a sliding doors moment. And it's one of those things where it's like manager needs, or club needs versus player needs. I think if Lampard stays, or at least a coach comes in who offers him that freedom, he probably enjoys a better career at Chelsea. But do Chelsea enjoy better success on the pitch? That's always a big question. I think for Ziyech as a playmaker, for what he requires, there is absolutely, I think, a fair point of his adaptation to the Premier League and, his physicality or lack of it, and sort of dealing with more space in the Eredivisie and kind of not obviously having that in the Premier League. But I do think there is absolutely a conversation around Chelsea not having that role for him the moment Thomas Tuchel came in, and to be honest, Graham Potter hasn't given him much of a look in, so it very much feels like it's best for all parties with this stage of his career to go somewhere else. And I think a move will be had in January, whether that is back to Ajax, which was linked in the summer, or going to AC Milan, where he has been linked for several years now. I think it's the best move for him. Let's look at some right-back targets. Rob Prattley tweeting about Real Madrid's interest in January for Cesar Azpilicueta. And the interesting thing about potential replacements, or at least new and younger fullback options for Chelsea, Walker Peters, Malo Gusto and Jeremy Frimpong have all been discussed. Pedro Porro apparently is well liked as well, but lots of interest from elsewhere. Denzel Dumfries from Inter Milan, currently with, of course, the Netherlands in the World Cup, has been linked for several years as well. Maybe an option, but still very expensive. And of course, I think this is very relevant, Tino Livramento, that summer buyback clause will also be considered. Obviously sold from Chelsea to Southampton in 2021. A lot of good options there. I do think this has been a bit of a blind spot, and I did write something about this a few months ago where I sort of compared Chelsea's right-back problem with Reece James and how dominant and obvious, he's going to be first choice when he's fit, and hopefully for the long term with Chelsea, because we've given him that 6-year deal. We hope he recovers well from this injury and he flies into the second half of the season. Touchwood, remains fit, and I think probably becomes Chelsea player of the season, because he's been that good when he has been on the pitch for Chelsea in 22-23 so far. Not enough of it. But then how do you get subsequent sort of backup for him when that player maybe knows, a bit like Harry Kane at Spurs, they may not be playing a lot of the time? So you've got some names there. I think Walker Peters obviously has a lot of experience in the Premier League with Southampton. He was linked in the summer. Gusto is a young player. I think he's developing, could grow into something better. Obviously, Ligue 1 experience, and sometimes that Ligue 1 adaptation from France is actually quite good for the Premier League. There seems to be kind of a natural link between those two leagues compared to others. Jeremy Frimpong does excite me, because I've actually seen Frimpong live this season when I went to see Bayer Leverkusen, obviously watching Callum Hudson-Odoi out there, and he should have scored that day. Actually, he was bombing down the right. He was actually playing higher up that day. I think he was playing on the right of a 4-2-3-1, and he was really exciting that day. He's got that flair about him. He's got that fearlessness too. He's only, I think, 21, 22 at the moment, so still got a lot of years to go in his career. He was at Celtic before, at Leverkusen. He very much fits in with Bundesliga football. But the great thing I think about Frimpong is there is that versatility to him, so I don't think he would be kind of crippled if he comes into Chelsea and he'd only have to play at right back and he wouldn't be able to play anywhere else. He could very much play higher up the pitch, could offer Chelsea a wide solution that we maybe haven't had, and then you've kind of got that dual purpose for him where he could play as kind of backup as a wing back or a more conventional right back for Reece James. Out of those, just the players I've been analysing this season, or I've watched the most of Frimpong out of these options, even more than Walker Peters, even though of course he plays in the Premier League. I think Frimpong would be a very exciting option and could turn into one of those kind of cheaper gem signings for Chelsea that turns out to offer great value in the coming years. Let me know your opinions. I mean, Dumfries, from people who watch him regularly, say not the best option. And Livramento, obviously, there's always been that buyback there, and whether Chelsea have activated. But he, of course, is recovering at the moment from a really bad ACL injury that he suffered in April. So it's how he recovers from that injury and whether Chelsea want to go towards him and whether he'd want to come back to Chelsea. That's obviously a big question as well. The final story, just a small one here, and it is one that got away. Chelsea apparently were keen in 2019 for Las Palmas youngster Pedri, and were one of two clubs alongside Barcelona who have moved strongly for the 16-year-old. This is from Sport Witness at the time this has emerged. I think, I can't remember who, it may have been Vince on Twitter, or one of the big Chelsea accounts reshared this story. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, seeing what Pedro has done for Barcelona, seeing what he's doing on the international stage for Spain at the moment at the World Cup, it may be why Chelsea's new owners are pursuing some of these younger talents so aggressively at the moment. Obviously, over the summer, we signed Carney Chukwuemeka, Gabriel Slonina from Chicago Fire, who's coming in January, Amari Hutchinson, who's already impressed after signing from Arsenal in the academy, Zakarian from Zenit, and Endrick has been one of the big names in recent weeks from Palmeiras. Listen, there are always going to be players who either are in your academy and they are released at a young age and they turn out, you know, like Declan Rice, or they turn out like Musiala. I think a lot of people kind of get angry about that and always blame the club. And I can understand at points that absolutely I think is a valid argument. But sometimes there's always is that sort of sliding doors thing of, you know, does that player become the player they are if they stay at Chelsea? You know, do they develop in the same way? Does Declan Rice develop into the same midfielder? Probably because of the qualities and the mentality of that player. But that's a big part of his kind of, if you want to talk about superheroes, that's a big part of his origin story. Does he have the same incentive? As I say, does he get the same opportunities? Does he have the same fire after being released at Chelsea at such a young age and then growing into this player? Some players are just kind of, they have the technical ability, the cream rises to the top eventually. But I think for some of these players, going somewhere else, having that kind of setback is big for them, and they go to, say, a new culture, a new country, or just a different club, and they grow into something different. And I think that's always a relevant thing, kind of a nuanced thing to speak about when we're referring to these players that kind of get away from Chelsea, if we have them, or we maybe could have signed them. In a case of Pedri, yeah, it's a bit of a regret, but hopefully one of those young players that we are buying at the moment turns into a gem, and hopefully we will develop some in the coming years from Cobham. But that is it for today's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching on my YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in on the podcast. Please do give us a rating and review. It really does help out. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, hit that like button because it helps out too. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea as well. I'm also on TikTok now currently at SonOfChelsea as well, posting some good stuff on there too. So please go and follow if you haven't already. Link in the description box below. And I will see you again very soon. All the best.